Don't have too many people connected yet, but they will probably come at the last minute.
Okay, we are going to have a nice conversation with Linda and Richard.
You have to be careful when the mics are open. All of a sudden, everybody hears.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, everybody's been hearing what we have said, but
Yes, it's public knowledge.
that's the way it is. Okay, Richard, you want to start on time or you want to give it another minute?
2 minutes.
2 minutes more?
Ora Latina.
I think that's a good idea. I think let's give them 2 more minutes. Not everybody that's participating is from Switzerland. Although I must say that when I go to Monterrey, I'm always just amazed at how punctual the Mexicans are in Monterrey. If you're going to be 5 minutes late for a meeting, you have to call and advise them that you're 5 minutes late. And it's, I mean, they're so upset if you're 5 minutes late. So there are places in the world that are as punctual as the Swiss, actually.
Yeah, no, everybody's busy. Everybody has their different priorities all throughout the day, their careful schedule, so they don't want to wait.
Of course, exactly. Yeah, that was something that Angel was saying, that in Venezuela, he was not able to organize meetings until he actually physically got there and called them the day of the meetings. Whereas in Chile, he used to be able to organize meetings 1 month in advance.
Yeah.
Difference.
And I can see your husband has connected.
Oh, good. Okay.
Mine will not connect. He's having dinner right now.
Somebody's already raising the hand, but
Premature.
a little bit premature as we haven't yet started. Okay, Richard, what do you think? Shall we go
I
ahead?
think it's okay. Start.
Welcome to our webinar entitled A New Future for the Multilatinas. My name is Tatiana Gaspar. I'm the Managing Director of the Latin American Chamber of Commerce in Switzerland. Our speaker today is a senior lecturer at Cornell University's Johnson School of Management. She is also a leading expert on multinational corporations in emerging markets. We are honored and proud that she accepted our invitation to speak on this topic in the current context. A very warm welcome, Dr. Lourdes Casanova.
Thank you, Tatiana.
It's also a great pleasure to introduce the moderator of this session, who is with us for the first time, connecting from Berlin. He is a specialist on Swiss-Latin American relations and spent most of his professional life as a correspondent for the Swiss daily Neue Zürcher Zeitung in different countries of Latin America. A cordial welcome, Richard Bauer.
It's my pleasure.
Before we start, our Chamber's Vice President, Linda Walker, will address a few personal remarks. After the formal part, we reserve time for questions, which our viewers can submit in writing in the Q&A section. As always, we are recording this webinar and will post the recording on our website. If you worry about privacy, you can ask your question anonymously. Now I hand over to you, Linda.
The big advantage of having webinars these days is the fact that people from all over the world can attend. Actually, Lourdes, Dr. Lourdes Casanova just informed us that she's in India. So we have today participants from Mexico, Peru, Paraguay, in addition to our Swiss participants. We are thrilled to finish this year's round of 12 webinars and conferences for the Latin American Chamber with a woman speaker. It is a delight for me to introduce my friend, Dr. Lourdes Casanova, a brilliant thinker, educator, and writer who was on the list of the 50 most influential Latin American intellectuals in 2014 and 2015, and on the list of the 30 most influential women in 2017 by ES Global. To give you a reference point, one of our previous speakers that you certainly all remember, Moises Naim, as well as Hernando de Soto, candidate for the upcoming elections in Peru, are among the others on the list. There is no one better suited to discuss our topic today than Lourdes, considering that she has studied the subject extensively and written a book, Global Latinas, Latin America's Emerging Multinationals. During one of her many participations in the WEF, at least 25 years ago, Lourdes and I met and have developed our friendship ever since. I now pass the word on to Richard Bauer, who has kindly agreed to moderate our discussions. Many of you know Richard from his distinguished career at the Swiss newspaper NZZ, Neue Zürcher Zeitung, covering all of Latin America, where he has lived for over 30 years of his professional life. Richard and I have a lot in common, having both lived in Peru. We also spent frequently time together while he was in Mexico as the foreign correspondent for the NZZ. Now I pass the word over to Richard.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to see so many distinguished professionals sitting around this digital fireplace, sponsored by the Latin American Chamber of Commerce. I'm speaking to you from semi-lockdown Berlin, one of the Corona hotspots in Germany. I hope all of you, wherever you are safe and well. Without further ado, let's have a closer look at our main topic, the Multilatinas. In a difficult environment where the Latin American economies are shrinking and Corona has such a devastating effect on people and societies in the region, the question is there a new future for this kind of homegrown transnational companies? No doubt, the Corona pandemic will put under pressure the concept of market-driven globalization in favor of eventually more regional approaches when it comes to reshape economic relations. In general, Multi-Latinas are new Latin American companies that are the product of emerging markets and practice a modern concept of international expansion. In some cases, they grow from Multilatinas to global Latinas. They have conquered over the last decades in a very innovative way many businesses that produce bread, oil, or cement, build bridges and roads, deliver services as airlines, connect people through mobile phones, or entertain guests in restaurants like Astrid y Gaston, be it in Peru, Ecuador, or Mexico. A new fast-growing niche, which we will discuss further on, is their expansion in the field of e-commerce. My first conscious contact with the Multilatinas was years ago a shopping experience in a supermarket in Colombia when I found myself forced to buy some bread. Coming from Mexico, I was familiar with a brand called Bimbo. What a surprise to find their logo again on the shelf in Medellin. The Bimbo effect was for me something similar to the Nestle effect from my childhood, a familiar name in a confusing, unexpected environment. This brings me to my first question to our dear friend Lourdes, a seasoned expert in emerging markets and Multilatinas. Tell us, when did you discover the Multilatinas as a growing phenomenon from Mexico to Argentina, from Chile to Brazil? How do you explain their rapid expansion in the last decades? What's the share, if you know that on top of your head, of the Multilatinas in the overall GDP of the region? And which countries gave birth until now to most Multilatinas? Quite a big set of first questions. Go ahead, Lourdes. But open your mic.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much, Richard. Also, thank you to the Latin American Chamber of Commerce in Switzerland for the invitation. And thank you to Linda, who is a tremendous executive, has been, is, and a friend, executive in the financial sector, a friend of many. Definitely, I am one of them, and a tremendous networker for the region, and tremendous. She loves the region, and she always wants to help the region. So this initiative is a way also to change the narrative. The news coming from Latin America, again and again, Latin America losing with Asia, Latin America, the one most affected in the pandemic. So all the things are negative. So let's, in this webinar and all the webinars that she has organized, to change the narrative, to give hope, to start with the positive news that actually there are in the region. So your first question was, how did I start getting interested in the region? So actually I was teaching at INSEAD, a business school in France, in Singapore, in Abu Dhabi. I was teaching about cross-cultural issues, and it was 96. And my husband and I went for a sabbatical to Haas, to UC Berkeley. I sent my syllabus. They said, okay, we are inviting you to teach if you want. Please send us the syllabus of your class. So I sent it, and they said, okay, why don't you focus more on business in Latin America? At that time, there were no other emerging markets but Latin America. Latin America was coming out of the lost decade of the 80s, and because of that, many companies also were resilient, had learned, and were starting to thrive again. And while I taught at Haas, I remember looking at case studies, Harvard case studies, and there were two, Petrobras and Vale. And I thought, wow, how am I going to teach a class on Latin America in a business school without any case studies? And also, coming from a business school, knowing that the private sector of any country is a pillar, you just mentioned Nestle, a pillar of, and so many others in Switzerland, a pillar of the development of the economic growth, job creation, innovation of any country. So I thought it's time for me to start writing case studies just as out of necessity for my class. And that's how I discovered all these companies that you mentioned from Mexico, and that I cover in my book that now is more than 10 years old. It was published in 2009, but it's what I did in the previous 10 years. So we have from Mexico and Brazil mainly. You say, what is the origin? Mainly Mexico and Brazil, Cemex, América Móvil, Grupo Bimbo, you mentioned, the biggest bread company in the world, really global, expansion in China. Latin American companies have been very shy expanding in China. Here we have a very clear example of a success. From Brazil again, Petrobras, Vale, Embraer now just went through a failed takeover from Boeing, but maybe this is a failure and actually a success in disguise, because the company in Brazil will keep inside the country this manufacturing marvel that is Embraer. Natura, you have not mentioned it yet, but definitely a cosmetics company that now in the crisis bought the international assets of Avon. And then you just mentioned Astrid Gaston. I was the first one writing a case study for my book on Astrid Gaston. Peru is now in not a very good shape, but at that time, let's don't forget that Peru was coming out of a terrible time. You would, with a brand Peru at that time, the guerrilla war, the civil war, and guess what? Astrid and Gaston were able to change the narrative and to say Peru has an extraordinary cuisine. Let's face it, let's change the brand of the country and attract tourism. So yes, this in Concha y Toro, again, you didn't mention this one, but Chilean company, one of the first ones to break the monopoly of French wine, and again, a very global company exporting all over the world. These are the ones that I wanted to mention. With respect to the weight to the GDP, you sent me the questions this morning, I tried to find out and I couldn't. That will be for the next time. You are in mute, Richard. Yeah.
We can assume that the share of the regional GDP that is covered by these multilatinas is growing year by year. I don't have an idea either if it's 5% or if it's 10%, but it is really interesting to see how it grows steadily. Let me go to our next question, Lourdes. In which sectors of Latin American economies do you observe a major penetration of multilatinas? Which are the sectors that are preferred? Do they have specific advantages, these multilatinas, on one side over local businesses and on the other over global acting real multinationals that could compete? How do you see this?
Okay, very interesting question. So where? So I would, number one, the region has tremendous natural resources. So it's only normal that some of them are in oil. Pemex, a state-owned company in Mexico, Petrobras, have state-owned and public company in Brazil, but also Ecopetrol in Colombia, and let's don't forget Codelco, a state-owned copper company, one of the biggest in the world. So these companies, by the size, they have assets in many different countries, one way or another, either because they refine, like Mexico refines a lot of the oil in Texas, or because they need suppliers. So these companies, by nature, by the size, is global. And let's don't forget, one company that has been part of the Fortune Global 500 for many years is PDVSA from Venezuela. Originally the biggest of all, and originally very well managed, and very originally, of course, has fallen out of the Fortune Global 500. So on the one hand, we have what they are called national oil corporations, NOCs. These are ones. Then we have quite a few family conglomerates. So companies, and we have many, in every country we have, so companies that are usually family owned at some point, and instead of going global very soon, they have gone also horizontally. They have grown horizontally and moved from consumer goods to, they may have a financial arm. So that's another type of those companies. And then we have also in retail, and we have the Chileans, Falabella, and others. And this retail is a sector that is quite local. If we think at the big ones of the sector, and again, you were saying, how do you compare with the big ones of the sector? Let's think Falabella or Oxxo in Mexico. So Falabella in Chile, expanding in South Africa, expanding in South America, or Oxxo expanding all over. Is another format, is a much smaller format, but competing with Walmart. And let's look at the big ones, for instance, Walmart. How successful has been Walmart internationally? So Walmart revenues come mainly from the US because retail is a sector that you need to know the customer. And in that sense, the locals have an advantage. So definitely retail has been a sector that they have won. And then we mentioned Bimbo, but we could also mention Gruma. And in restaurants, that's a company that I followed from the beginning because, and I wrote about it in the book, Pollo Campero from Guatemala. So it's like fast food, but being very also catering for the local taste. So these are ones. And you mentioned, I believe you mentioned also e-commerce that is growing. And we have Mercado Libre. Mercado Libre, originally from Argentina, but all over the region, and being strong, being able to compete with Amazon expansion. The battle has just started. We don't know who will win, but definitely Mercado Libre has been a company that has grown during the pandemic and is doing extremely well.
And Lourdes, do you think that Latin America is prepared for e-commerce? If you look at digital infrastructure, logistics, border controls, customs?
Well, okay, a couple of things. We compared e-commerce companies. We compared Flipkart in India, that was then bought by Walmart, Alibaba in China, super powerful, more international than Amazon, by the way, with Mercado Libre in Latin America and Jumia in Africa. So clearly, the emerging markets e-commerce companies like Mercado Libre, what they have done is innovate into the business model. For instance, they have allowed cash on delivery. The trust is less than in Europe or US, so they allowed initially to pay when you deliver the merchandise. One thing they did. And second, they have been very aggressive promoting online payment. Alibaba is the clear winner with Alipay, clearly the winner, but also Mercado Libre and also Jumia in Africa. So because less penetration of credit cards, they had to innovate. So because of these innovations, Mercado Libre has won, but also Luisa in Brazil and others. So we see these innovations that allow these local companies to succeed in a way that is sometimes surprising, because often I hear the type of questions that you were asking regarding e-commerce.
And it proves again that they are close to reality and close to the customers, these multilatinas, so they know how to react and to invent what's lacking in a developed economy. Yes. So I guess that's a good point. Lourdes, let's see, who are the main competitors for the multilatinas today? Do you think that Chinese companies, for instance, in the region are a big problem or are a competitor? And do you think that many of these growing companies are also looking towards new markets outside of Latin America?
Okay, very interesting question. So what has happened with China, okay, the growth of China is not the subject of today's webinar, but it's like the elephant in the room. So China is the main trade partner of some 130 countries in the world, is the main trade partner of South American countries, and is becoming more and more one of the main investors of Brazil, but also Chile, Argentina, and project financing. Venezuela was for very long one of the countries that China was giving more financing in exchange for oil. So that China does this thing very well. So yes, these very important investments from China. So China is relatively new in the region. So what happens with, let's say, AGE Group. AGE Group competes with Coca-Cola from Peru, beverages, or other companies, or Falabella, we mentioned Walmart. Falabella knows Walmart. Walmart is being discussed in every single business school of Latin America and the world. You know the company. But now, Mercado Libre, for instance, has to do more and more with AliExpress, Alibaba, in the international arm of Alibaba, that delivers merchandise, whether in Mexico or in Brazil or everywhere. So number one, the competitor is less well known. And also, initially, Latin America welcomed Chinese investments with open arms, thinking China is like us, is also still an emerging market, so will treat us better. Now, seeing more and more that there's a very strong competition from angel to evil. So neither nor, we just need to know that there is a new competition coming from Latin America, and when I'll present the slides, yes, Latin American Chinese labor costs are higher than Mexico's or Brazil's, but definitely very competitive still, and with a very integrated and efficient value chain, and they are able to deliver in no time all over the world. So yes, Chinese companies are very strong competitors of the local companies.
So why don't you show us your charts, Lourdes?
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Okay, so then let me just quickly go, and since they mentioned the global Latinas, I just put a picture of my last books, and then also this one in IDB that has a number of case studies can be downloaded for free. And some of the case studies I think are still valid. And when I travel in the region, many professors, they tell me, you know, this is free. So we are using the cases in this compilation of case studies that was published by the IDB. Okay, and then, so this is the last book that we are publishing now. Okay, so then this is, okay, so one thing about the Brazilian and the Mexican companies. Number one, neither Brazil nor Mexico, these are the number of companies from Brazil and from Mexico in the Global 500 of Fortune in 2020. So yes, we have been discussing how good they are. Brazil and Mexico, because of their GDP, their size of the economy, and their GDP per capita, should have more big economies in the Fortune 500. As I mentioned before, big companies are the ones that are by nature global in most cases, because they need investment, they need to invest abroad, and definitely also investments abroad. So the biggest ones are Petrobras, JBS, meat, also consumer goods and agricultural products, very important, JBS. But then in Brazil, another thing we tend to forget, and I have not talked about it, is the power of the Brazilian banking sector. So of the 7 companies in the Global 500 of Fortune, there are 4 banks, 2 private, Itaú and Banco Bradesco, and 2 public, Banco do Brasil and Caixa Econômica Federal. So often we tend to forget that the Brazilian banking sector is very powerful, very technologically savvy. From the very first day they bet on having, even now, some of my Brazilian students tell me, you know, I can do more online with my Brazilian bank than with my American bank here in the US. And also mining, we mentioned Vale, but definitely Grupo Mexico and others. These are huge, huge companies and very international. Vale bought one of the biggest acquisitions of any Latin American company when they bought Inco in Canada. From the Mexican side, we have Pemex, one of the national oil companies, with Petrobras in Brazil. América Móvil, okay, we hear a lot about Carlos Slim Empire, but again, I wrote probably what was the first case about América Móvil almost 20 years ago. It's a company, telecom company, that is responsible for the prepaid phones that we had and we still use. Actually, they just sold Track Phone in the US. Track Phone, you go to any Walmart and they sell prepaid phones, and I used to buy when I had visitors in the US, I used to buy and give it to them. They just sold the company, but till now they were the owners of one of the biggest mobile company by minutes sold in the US, that was TracFone. Then the electricity company, that this one is not global, of course, it's a very local company. And then Fomento Económico Mexicano, FEMSA, that they bottle Coca-Cola. Okay, then another thing, and this, I hope we discuss this later, is that the region has bet on attracting foreign direct investment. So here, this ranking does not collect all the investments that arrive to the country. They collect only the data on greenfield projects, announced greenfield projects. So in the world, China is #1 by greenfield projects by the value of the announced greenfield projects that arrive to any country. China is #1, US is #2, India, surprisingly, in the last 10 years has become #3, UK, Vietnam, you know, Vietnam is all the time in the press as the new China in terms of outsourcing. But then you have Mexico, Indonesia, Australia, and Brazil. So we find both Mexico and Brazil more or less in a ranking that more or less corresponds at their size of the economy. Well, Brazil is #11 and Mexico is after Brazil, but still the policies to attract foreign direct investment as a way for development have been very effective. And even now, Mexico and Brazil are among the countries that attract more foreign direct investment. However, the region has not promoted at all, and that's a weakness for these multilatinas, the investments abroad. And we find Brazil in #32 and Mexico #37, really behind what would correspond by their GDP nominal and the GDP per capita. Behind Turkey, South Africa, Malaysia, so much smaller economies, but have been promoting investments. This is food for thought. And in my interviews with multilatinas, they all told me, you know, I told the embassy that I was, let's say, Singapore, where I used to teach. I talked to Vale and Embraer that had offices in Singapore, and they said, you know what, when we told them we are here, they said, oh, please, let's have a feijoada in the embassy and we'll invite you. So zero or very little support. At some point, BNDES helped them, but definitely very little. And then here we have the main companies by FDI announced greenfield investments outside. Not a surprise, América Móvil is up there, Vale, Celina is an hotel company from Panama, Hejoasu is a financial conglomerate, part of the Votorantim group. Grupo Mexico, mining company, EBX, okay, this is a company that is bankrupt right now, but during the last 10 years have been LATCAM Airlines and others, and Petrobras, of course, among the companies that have invested most in greenfield investments abroad. And then another very interesting data point is where the companies go. Interestingly enough, Brazilian companies, again, this is not the value of the total investments, only greenfield, goes mainly to Colombia, Chile, also very big there, US as well. So Colombia #1, Chile #2, US #2, Chile, China also surprisingly, Canada is because of Bauer. So we have Colombia, US, Canada, and then Chile, and then Malaysia, and then China. However, from Mexico, that is on the left, sorry, this is Mexico, this is not Brazil, this is Mexico.
Yes.
Mexico, they are going directly to the US, and then to Spain as a platform to enter Europe. So from US, you have Grupo Bimbo, Cemex, I mentioned América Móvil. So Mexican companies are more aggressive to move outside Latin America. Okay, this is Okay, and this is the another thing that I mentioned. Okay, we are in a moment, Richard, you mentioned that in your intro, of regionalization, of a US-China trade war, that we anticipate that, of course, a lot of what was the manufacturing that was outsourced to China will come back to the US, to Mexico, to Latin America, hopefully. But then, if we look at the labor cost, China is still very competitive. It's more expensive. This is the minimum wage, price of gasoline, and price of electricity. That the three components represent about 75% of the cost of any manufacturing good. So yes, Mexico is very cheap. Right now, the minimum wage of any maquila in Mexico, but it's not enough. China offers value because of the integration of the value chain. Okay, that's just a little bit of data that I wanted to share with you, and that is it.
Great, thanks, Lourdes. Just a small question. Do you have any explanation why Colombia is so high in influx of foreign direct investment?
From Brazil, Mexican companies go to Central America often first, and then immediately to the US, because they have NAFTA, now USMCA, that provides a framework in which companies are more comfortable to move. You have a legal framework from which to move. However, Brazil moves immediately to Argentina, to Colombia, to neighboring countries. So Brazilian companies expand within South America.
Okay. Now let me touch one topic, the question of reputation. Do you think that governments and consumers trust Multilatinas? Do they have problems with Multilatinas from a point of view of perception, what they are, what they do? We all remember the Odebrecht corruption scandal, which affected the reputation of a Multilatina active through 400 and more companies created and bound together by the Odebrecht oligarch in Latin America, in USA, in Europe and Africa. What do you think is this perception in the region when it comes that a Latina, Multilatina comes and says, let's go for a new country?
I love Brazil, so this is to disclose my weakness for this country. I think Brazil is a very important country within Latin America. In normal times, let's say, when the currency is not as it is right now, that is really, really down, although recovering a little bit, but still very down, is double the size of the economy of Mexico. What happens in Brazil matters a lot in Latin America. At some point, Brazil, I remember at some point, President Lula was in the Mexico Business Summit that we both attend, but Linda also attends. And I remember, I videotaped that moment. The whole Mexican Regiomontana business elite applauding, standing President Lula. These years are long gone. And Brazil is having a tremendous problem with reputation. It's responsible, I think, if I counted well, for the fall of 14 presidents in the region that have been tainted and had to resign either directly or indirectly because Odebrecht, Peru case in point, but also directly or indirectly, many presidents in the region. So as some say, is the best export of Brazil, corruption. So definitely is the rise and fall. I hope a solution is found. I used to, I teach about emerging markets, and my first years I taught mainly about Latin America. I had Odebrecht executives in my class. I had Odebrecht executives at home. I admire also many of them, I won't give names because some of them may be in prison right now, but I admire them. Odebrecht was one of the best companies in big construction projects in the world. They were able to build airports in the US and highways all over the region. You have to have a lot of positive know-how to be able to do so. Okay, we know what happened, unfortunately, and we need to face corruption issues that are, by the way, of course, a tremendous ethical issue, but at the same time also damage the reputation of the country. And I hope that Brazil is able to turn the page and to find a closing. These are things that are never closed, and always the Pandora box opens again. It happened recently in Colombia, well, about 1 year ago in Colombia. It happens everywhere. The corruption is nowhere to hide, but somehow, as I hope that they move on, and it's for me a pity that a company like Odebrecht has fallen. I knew the father and the son, and again, I admired and I spoke extremely well about the company in my classes, because as I said, there was one of the few companies able to build successfully major infrastructure projects. So hopefully, and also in Brazil, for instance, so many bad side effects. Petrobras was one of the first companies that was part of the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. Of course, as soon as the corruption scandal started, was removed from that, was one of the few green oil companies in the world. So,
but Lourdes, do you think that the other multi-Latinas have learned out of these corruption scandals? And I mean, also their power to do lobbying in the countries for tax exemptions, for even special regulations when it comes to environment. Do they see that they have a problem in their host countries when they do not respect the law?
Definitely, this is a very difficult problem to tackle that needs to be tackled, and that's it. I cannot say anything else. But definitely, these are countries sometimes that have moved between dictatorship and democracy, and not all the institutions are strong to face the situation. Okay, I remember in the big wave of privatization of the 90s, what happened was that the regulatory bodies overviewing the privatization, there was no proper training, not proper capacity building, and no salaries. The salaries were so low of these guys. So definitely these things are built over time and definitely require time. And hopefully the region, as you are saying, will learn from it and will be able to move to a more transparent and more accountable. Accountability has to be a priority.
Let me move on to another question for the future, the famous question of sustainability. I mean, are multi-Latinas aware of their responsibilities towards people, society, and environment? Do they actively promote these issues? Can they even serve as role models in their business fields in different countries?
Yeah.
How do you see this topic?
Yeah, actually, one of the chapters in my book is poverty a business issue? So, and why? Because we tend to see sustainability and also commitment to society, respect to stakeholders with Western eyes. Actually, these companies, and I mentioned Petrobras, that okay, then was involved in the was one of the most respected, environmentally friendly oil companies in the world. As I said, one of the first ones, members of the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. Also, okay, we have also the Vale scandal with the Brumadinho problem with the barriers that broke, and definitely terrible. But again, okay, over there was involved a consulting firm from Germany that said that everything was fine, and then it was not. So very complex situation. So going back to your question, if you look at the Global Compact, the number of small, medium-sized, and big companies from Brazil is enormous. So Brazil is overrepresented in that list. There is, because of the Amazon, because of a number of issues, there is, and Natura is always an example. Natura, the way they source natural products from the Amazon in environmentally friendly cosmetic products all over, the way they promote well-being, a pioneer in the field. So I would say, without being overly positive, definitely many companies, Grupo Bimbo, their policy is never fire employees and to take very good care of their employees. Banco Itaú, the training programs they have, educational programs. So many companies in the region do a lot. And as I said, if you look at the list of Global Compact, Brazil is one of the most represented countries by number of companies in the world at the United Nations Global Compact.
Lourdes, if you look now at these big Latino multinationals, do you have the impression that they all try to expand far away from Latin America to other emerging markets, even to developed markets? What is the actual trend?
Okay. So, so far we have been, as I said, we'll change narratives and we'll be positive. So that's the positive. Let's look at the negative. If you look at the negative, I mentioned one factor. There are not enough big companies in Latin America. There are not enough big, so usually the number of big companies is linked to the GDP nominal and so the size of the economy and the GDP per capita. So if you compare to other countries, there are not enough. Second, and that's very important because also there is a study of a few years ago of the World Bank that says what has happened is that because there are not enough big companies, the big companies are the ones that pull the small ones and the medium-sized ones. Because there are not enough big ones, they are unable to create the local ecosystems that nurture the small and the medium size, and the small and the medium size are left on their own. That's one thing, not enough. Second, I mentioned before, emerging markets, Korea, which probably is not an emerging market anymore, China, they all encourage their companies, they support their companies going abroad. So Latin American companies moving abroad have been a little bit like, okay, adventurous, seeing the need to learn, to grow, and sometimes to natural hedge to the variations of the local economy, the crisis. So you have revenues in dollars or in euros. In times of crisis, like what we have had this year, the revenues in dollars and in euros offset the losses in local currency. So another thing that, yes, I mentioned and I studied them, they are global, but not enough. And Brazilians in particular should be more global than they are. Brazilian banks, I mentioned them before. I remember 10 years ago, one Brazilian bank hired a student of mine to do a feasibility study to enter Mexico. That Brazilian bank has never entered Mexico yet, 10 years later. And they have the size, the know-how, the technological, they are very technologically savvy. They could, and they are not. When I tell my students, Brazilian banks are among the most profitable in the world, more technology, no one knows. So definitely there is has been shy. So if we compare to the rest, because as I said, because of the size of the economy and the GDP per capita, these Brazilian companies, Mexicans, should be even more global. Mexicans.
So you agree on that, Lourdes? There would be a potential for these companies if there would be more support, if there would be more openness also from investment agencies that would help.
Definitely. You have investment agencies, for instance, ProChile has been very helpful to internationalize Chilean wine, I mentioned, but also, again, the retailers, again, and others. While, let's say, again, Brazil, BNDES helped for a while. Now the role of BNDES is unclear going forward. So the only country that had more or less a formal organization that would help them is being questioned. Also, regarding BNDES, I remember I interviewed a person of BNDES, and he was telling me, actually, you know what? We have a 300 million fund to help companies to internationalize. It's not being used. So Brazilian companies keep saying, we have such a big country, okay, China is very big, and the companies go abroad, because that's when you become stronger, you learn. And right now, because of the regionalization that we see, so the globalization, the world will never stop being global, because we all need to buy and sell. We need to buy, Europe needs to buy oil, and Brazil needs to export soya. So in China needs soya, so in iron ore, and so the world will never stop being global, never. But yes, we are moving to a more regional world. You mentioned that before. Over there is an opportunity for global Latinas.
That brings me to my last question, Lourdes, exactly this topic of crisis of globalization. If that, I mean, Corona pandemic produces a kind of backlash probably for the globalizing model of our economies. Could it be that regional multinationals have a new advantage over globally acting transnational companies in this new kind of economic world order that may happen? Could a return to more regional and local production of goods and services be the new game changer? What's your looking at the crystal ball?
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. Africa, the last year, has been signing a regional trade agreement. 54 out of 55 countries have ratified this agreement. Asia, led by China, has just signed the new RCEP, in a moment that you are mentioning regionalization. Friends and enemies, one could argue, have all signed the agreement. South America needs an agreement, I mentioned the USMCA, like an umbrella agreement that helps Bimbo, for sure, Nimac, Gruma, all these companies to go to the US, because there is a stable framework. South America clearly needs an agreement, and that's one of the demands that I ask the government and the private sector in the region. As one ambassador from Brazil said in my class, the art of politics is to try whatever else has tried before and has failed, and this new politician wins. So I hope a politician, I don't know which one, wins and is able to put together something that seems impossible right now, is an agreement that facilitates trade. There is not enough intra-trade in the region. There is data from the IDB, from the ECLAC, every single year saying the goods from Latin America go to the US and then come back. It's ridiculous. Or go to Europe and come back. We need more intra-trade in the region and more investments that, again, will help the citizens and also the companies.
Thank you. For our second part of this webinar, I'm handing over the mic to Tatiana in Zurich, who has collected the questions from our participants. The floor is yours, Tatiana.
Thank you, Richard. I have two questions from our viewers. I take them by order as they came in from Gerardo Basurco. Where do the multinationals pay taxes?
Okay, that's a big question. And of course, the OECD has a number of studies saying that very often multinationals are located in fiscal paradises and don't pay taxes. I have not studied in detail all these multilatinas, because multilatinas in these cases, in most cases, are very clear. They know where they are, and I assume they pay taxes in their own countries.
Then I have a question from Dr. Philip Nell. He's the honorary ambassador of our chamber. Is there a second group of multilatinas to be expected to enlarge substantially the present group? What are the major barriers for Latin multilatinas to expand abroad? So it's actually two questions.
So for the first one, we have been discussing about technology. Technology is a great enabler to grow. I wouldn't say relatively easy, because we have very big companies in the space, from US, from China mainly, but definitely we mentioned Mercado Libre. And again, in banking, we have Nubank. Nubank is one of the few standalone online banks in the world. Most of the online banks are the subsidiary of a big bank. Or, for instance, I mentioned WeChat Pay and Alipay, that are pseudo banks in China, but again, they are a subsidiary of a huge technology conglomerate. Nubank is a standalone bank expanding in the region, and definitely very interesting. And I think that's where we will find, we have the unicorns in the region, Mercado Libre, Nubank, and others. And also another one we haven't mentioned is Rappi. Rappi is not strictly e-commerce. What they do is that services, small services that take very long in these super crowded and traffic congested cities, and definitely another one that is expanding in the region. So these very disruptive technology companies in e-commerce, in service industry, in finance, there is a myriad of fintechs in the region all over. Definitely that's where I can see the next group of multilatinas. In the second question, please remind me.
What are the major barriers for multilatinas to expand abroad?
Yeah, so I covered this question a little bit, but I would like to expand on this question.
Sure.
So what happens also is that the region is very unequal, very unequal. It's one of some of the countries are among the most unequal in the world. The usual examples are Chile, Brazil. I have not seen the latest statistics, but then Colombia, Chile, Brazil, always at the top of the most unequal countries in the world. So then what happens? A new president, the new president of any country, sometimes has reached the power with the help of the elite of the country, of these huge conglomerates, these huge families that dominate, and we have the names, that dominate the economy of the region. So he, because usually it's he, and in some cases very few she, the new president, the new prime minister of the country finds itself, and what it does, the first thing it does is, okay, I cannot see myself in this very unequal country favoring those who have helped me to go to power. So then I said that these companies need the help of the government, but this is very controversial, because if they have even more help from the government, what will happen? maybe is that the inequality will grow. In a moment in which we can think that consensus are impossible, so I said one thing is the need for a trade agreement of South America. Another thing we need is new consensus. You have the president that you want, that you have, so you have to somehow reach an agreement, and there have been some meetings and intending to do that, because guess what? The private sector is weak compared to the world, is very powerful in their own country, but often unable to compete globally. And then, as I said, not enough big companies that pull the small ones. So we are in this vicious circle that somehow has to be broken. And definitely, I said that these companies need help from the government, because otherwise they cannot compete. And at the same time, how can I advocate to help? And again, I don't want to mention names, because in some cases are friends and that I admire and great business leaders, but how do you do that? Somehow needs to be done, because otherwise the global competition is very difficult. It is not easy to win, and these companies are going to be yet again bought up by a big multinational, and then you lose competitiveness as a country.
Thank you. We have the next question from Her Excellency Liliane Legrand de Wenger. She's the ambassador of Paraguay in Switzerland. Are Multilatinas expected to grow outside the region after COVID-19 effects?
Okay, so this has been mentioned a number of times. We are moving to regionalization. So I advocate for internationalization as a way to learn, and internationalization beyond the region. But definitely we still need, and again, I go back to the Brazilians, but also Chileans, Colombians, Peruvians. I was the other day in another webinar organized by America Economia with Concha y Toro, with I don't remember the group from Grupo Bimbo from Mexico and others. And definitely, for instance, Grupo Bimbo, seen as their assets in Brazil going down. Their assets from Brazil were not going down. The problem is that we measure everything in dollars. Since the real has gone down so much, it's more than 5 point something to the dollar, so then their assets have gone down. So we need to have stability, and we need to have more growth in the region. And that's another thing, now that I mentioned the currencies, that's another thing that I would like to mention. I mentioned the need for trade agreement, the need to collaboration somehow, societies, big companies, governments, and also another thing, and we have seen this year devastating effects, is the currencies. There is no emerging market that has, and China is one, that has to be able to control the currency. Something needs to be done. The most volatile, so we looked at the evolution of currencies during this pandemic. The worst hit the Latin American ones and the South African rand. This is impossible for any company to plan, to innovate, to invest to the future with a currency that is so volatile. It's extremely damaging. So again, I used to tell Domingo Cavallo, Domingo, I am the last person who admires you. I was in favor of dollarization when no one was. I told him, when no one was. I think, okay, dollarization is not solving any problems. Ecuador is having problems. El Salvador is having problems. But definitely nothing like Argentina. Argentina, terrible. Brazil, terrible. You see the debt in dollars growing. The debt in dollars is the same. The problem is that you have to pay with a devalued currency, with a currency that has zero value. So definitely something needs to be addressed and solved. And again, I don't dare to say dollarization, but something needs to be done regarding the currencies for the survival of their own companies.
We have no other questions from the viewers. May I ask one? Or shall we wrap it up here? Do you still have time for one? I'm wondering about employee training and talent search inside the Multilatinas now with the disruption of social infrastructure, of academic life all over the world, all over Latin America. How do you see this component in the future? Will it be more difficult for them to attract the right people and to keep them?
Very interesting question. Definitely is a, okay. So what has happened again in the region, strangely enough, is that the region has not focused on primary, secondary education. So you have, okay, not the best universities in the world, but you have very good universities. Every year I receive interns from Universidad de los Andes in Colombia. Let me tell you, they are excellent. They are equal to my Cornell students, equal, excellent university. We have a network of experts on multinationals from emerging markets. I work with USP, with Uniandes again, Tec de Monterrey, Universidad de San Andrés, definitely excellent colleagues. So you have the paradox of excellent universities, excellent faculty at the top, and high school and primary school much weaker. You need, as you are saying, you need proper training for also basic labor that needs training, that needs to be able to use a computer to organize the manufacturing, and that is lacking in the region. In the region, we need more of this type of education, job training and vocational training often. I'm not saying more than university graduates, but definitely also that. And companies all over have training programs.
Okay, well, Richard, you told me it's time to wrap up. I agree, we have been past the hour. I would like to thank you very much, Dr. Lourdes Casanova, for sharing with us your in-depth analysis and so many different aspects that are relevant for the future of the Multilatinas. It was an honor and a real delight. Also, many thanks, Richard Bauer, for preparing the structure of this webinar so thoroughly. That was quite a pleasure to host. Dear viewers, thank you for joining us today and for your interest in our virtual events since we first launched them in April. This has been our last webinar this year. We already have a variety of exciting new sessions and projects in the pipeline for 2021. In the meantime, our board and I wish all of you and your loved ones a safe, healthy, and happy holiday season. Merry Christmas and lots of silver linings in the new year. Goodbye and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.